Hello there! Welcome to Skeleton Key Productions. I'm Crown Gray's Cocon. Let's get into the video. Today's video we're going to be asking the question of what if Ross Perot won? So this is the 1992 presidential election in which Ross Perot was running against Bill Clinton and George Bush Sr. So in our timeline, Bill Clinton ended up winning that election, but Ross Perot at a certain point was, he was leading in the polls, right? So Time magazine had him at 37%, whereas Bill Clinton and George Bush each had 24%. So considering he was a third party candidate, running as an independent, he did very, very well for himself. So we're just going to imagine what would have happened if he had actually won that election. Now, first of all, who was Ross Perot? I hear many of you asking. Well, he was a billionaire who was sick of how the traditional parties were governed in America. So what he wanted was a strong border with Mexico and was opposed to illegal immigration. He was opposed to the media and very hostile towards them. He was opposed to China and to its growing influence. And on top of that, he was opposed to NAFTA and other free trade deals. Where have we heard this before? Oh yeah, Donald Trump, who actually ended up joining what ended up becoming the Reform Party. So Ross Perot, after losing this election, he ended up forming the Reform Party, and this was kind of based on this kind of platform. And so Donald Trump actually ran for the Reform Party presidential ticket in the 2000 election. However, he ended up dropping out because by that point they had become very disorganized and were kind of arguing amongst each other. So Ross Perot, think about him almost like Trump before Trump, right? And Ross Perot was doing very, very well in these debates as well. He won 3 out of 4 of them, according to the polls that were taken at the time. And on average, out of those 4 debates, he got 37% of the support, whereas Bill Clinton just got 30% and Bush got 18%. So, he was doing very well. However, at a certain point in the race, because of family issues and misreports about different scandals and etc., he ended up dropping out for a brief period. And although he came back, it ruined his credibility because people were like, well, this guy is not really that serious. And so as a result, he ended up getting 19% of the popular vote. But as we discussed in our previous video of what if the UK had proportional representation, so definitely check that out. America, just like Britain, has a first past the post system, and America has, the electoral college, which is how they pick the president. So the president isn't directly elected; instead, it's based on winning particular states and stuff. And because of the first past the post nature of American politics, it means that if you're a Democrat living in Texas, your vote doesn't count. And similarly, if you're a Republican living in California, your vote doesn't count. And this is the case for the vast majority of states. There's only a handful which are swing states, and those handful of swing states end up having 95% of campaign finance going towards them, right? Because they're the only states that really swing elections when it comes to election times. So one of the things that Ross Perot stood on was having term limits for congressmen and for senators, because oftentimes the same people end up staying in for decades and decades and decades. Bernie Sanders, but not just Bernie Sanders. Many other people from both sides of the aisle end up kind of just being dinosaurs. They end up just staying there for 30, 40, 50 years, and new people with new ideas and stuff, it's quite difficult for them to kind of get in. And also as well, if you don't like your congressman, because of the way that the congressional districts are drawn, it means that the same people end up getting re-elected again and again and again, because you have safe Republican seats and you have safe Democrat seats. So very few seats end up being contestable when it comes to the time of the election. So in many cases, it really doesn't matter how you vote at election time in America, because based on where you are, you probably don't have any real say in the matter. So this is one of the things that he wanted to change by allowing people to directly vote for the president. So scrapping the whole electoral system and having direct elections of presidents. He also wanted to have campaign finance reform. So at the moment, you have lobbyists and they can spend millions and millions. They can spend unlimited amounts at election time to try and win votes. And so he wanted to have some sort of way of regulating this so that people can't just basically buy votes. And finally, what he also wanted to do was to have a balanced budget amendment. So in the late 90s, this came very, very close to happening. And actually, I was tempted to do a alternative history on this of what if the balanced budget amendment had actually passed. And it ended up being lost in the Senate by one vote. And yeah, so if this had actually happened, it would have meant that all the trillions and trillions of debt that they have got into in the last 20 or so years wouldn't have happened, because the balanced budget amendment would have said that the federal government would not be allowed to go into deficit. So each year they would have to, tax more than they spend, or rather a better way of saying, don't spend more than what you've raised in revenue. So this would have limited the growth of the federal government, but also it would have meant that the national debt would be a lot less. And famously, Ross Perot did a famous speech on this very issue, in which he said, "While the Cold War is ending, another war is upon us. In this war, the enemy is not the red flag of communism, but the red ink of our national debt, the red tape of our national bureaucracy. The casualties of this war are counted in lost jobs and in lost dreams." And so as a result, he had a kind of broad base of support, in particular with many independent voters and many moderate voters in the different parties. And so while he only got 19% of the popular vote, he ended up doing disproportionately well amongst certain demographics. In particular, he ended up doing very well amongst independents, conservative Democrats, and also moderate/liberal Republicans. And so people have often said, that Bush ended up losing that election because he ended up taking votes away from him, and this is why Bill Clinton won. But actually, the data on this has shown that he took roughly an equal number of people from both the Republican Party and the Democrat Party. So actually his base was, relatively broad. Although on a demographic level, he tended to do particularly well amongst white voters, especially white voters in the suburbs, especially ones who were slightly younger than average as well. So he didn't do very well amongst minorities. He didn't do very well in the inner cities. He didn't do very well also in certain regions of the country as well, particularly like the South, and in particular certain parts of the North. So his main base of support were in the Midwest and in the Western states. So looking at this election, what I've done is I've basically looked through all the different states and seen, so he got 19% in the popular vote, but we're seeing if he had got 37% in the popular vote, as these earlier polls had indicated, how would he have done, right? And so it's estimated that he would have won Maine, Alaska, Utah, Idaho, Kansas, Nevada, Montana, Wyoming, Arizona, Colorado, and New Hampshire. So this is pretty much a lot of the states in the kind of west of the country, and also two of them in the northeast, right? And so this would have given him 51 electoral votes based on what the Electoral College was back in 1992. So obviously different states have changed because of increases or decrease in population, so that's something to bear in mind. But this very crude rough estimation kind of ignores the fact of this is just if he got an extra 18% in each of these states. But obviously that 18% would have to come from somewhere, right? So it would come from Democrats, but it would also come from Republicans, right? So that's something to kind of bear in mind. Someone much smarter than me, I can kind of give a rough guess, and hopefully I'll remember to put it in the on screen now once I've actually sat through and sifted through some of the data. But more likely than not, he would have got a lot more than that. Certainly in certain states, such as Texas and California, if Bill Clinton or George Bush had their vote share reduced by the same amount that is reduced within this opinion poll, then there's every chance that he could have won in certain states. So it's not to say that it's impossible. If someone gets 37% of the national vote, chances are they probably are going to win, right? Especially if the other two candidates are on 30% or less. So that is something to kind of bear in mind, that yes, he could have won. It would have been very difficult, but it's not, but it wouldn't have been impossible. So how would this have changed American politics in general over the last 20 or 30 years? Well, something to note is that starting from this period and moving onwards, American politics has got very, very divisive, because everything is red team versus blue team and there's not a whole lot of nuance in the middle. It's, things get very tense and things get very heated, and there's a lot of distrust in, between the different parties, And actually this is something which we covered in our previous videos on political polarization in America, so definitely check those out, right? Because when it's a winners take all system, as we discussed in our last video as well, people get very tribal and people end up voting for parties that they don't really agree with just because they really, really hate people in the other party. So if you end up having the Reform Party basically being successful, if they're able to get someone into the White House, then they would be, quite a successful kind of like party, and it'd have a much greater legacy because, just from the 1992 election year, by the time it gets to 1996, that 19% drops down to 8% in the popular vote, which, is quite a dip down, right? But if he'd been able to become president, then there would have been a lot more credibility within the Reform Party. So the percentage of vote would have been a lot higher. So America, instead of being a kind of duopoly, instead of being this kind of two-party system, it would have ended up becoming a three-party system in which there's a lot more competition at election time. And something to note as well is that after this election, the two parties kind of ganged up and they basically said, right, we don't really want minor candidates from minor parties to kind of stand for these debates. And so for the vast majority of future debates, you didn't end up having like minor parties kind of being there. And so the American people at time of election are kind of given a choice between, Coke or Pepsi, red team or blue team, right? And it kind of destroys a lot of the nuance that people have because a lot of people are somewhere in the middle. Like not everyone is a conservative Republican, not everyone's a liberal Democrat. A lot of people are kind of in the center, and so these people don't really have a voice, and they end up kind of being divided and end up being stuck in camps where they don't really belong. And so having the Reform Party there would have probably made American politics a lot less tense. It would have, made people a bit more nuanced and a bit more open to different ways of thinking. And also it would have made the elections a lot more competitive. Like if you had the president being picked by a popular vote, then at election time, it ends up being a thing of, oh snap, we had to do campaigning in every one of the states. If you had a balanced budget amendment, the government couldn't just spend like more than it could take in. And so a lot of things that happened over the last few years wouldn't have happened. Like the last time America had a balanced budget was all the way back in 2001. So you're talking a 20-year period in which every single year they've had an unbalanced budget. So yeah, it's something to kind of note that like America would be a completely different place. But I think, well, at least from my perspective, and I'd like to see what people think in the comment section, hopefully it's not too crazy, but I think that generally speaking, America would be in a better position had Ross Perot won than otherwise. But while Ross Perot didn't win in that election, I can tell you how you can win right now. You can win by hitting the like button, right? You'll be the first one to hit the like button, or if there's been a few other people before then you could be maybe, I don't know, just hit the like button. I don't know how to put it together, but hit the like button, and also share with your friends, right? There must be some people who are interested in American politics. There must be some people who are in favour of proportional representation, because opinion polls showed that majority of people, both in America and in Britain, are in favour of it. So if you know people who are in favour of it, share it among your friends and stuff, right? And so if you like this video, obviously check out the other videos we have on this channel. We've got a whole lot more. So definitely hit them up. And the next video is going to be on what if Reagan became president in 1968, because he ran for the Republican Party then. He ended up losing to Richard Nixon, which is how we end up with President Nixon. So definitely check that out. We've got future videos as well, which are going to be covering a lot of more American things. So definitely give those a watch when they come out. And so with that being said, have a great day and bye.